Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 27th, 2017, our first Monday post-Thanksgiving. That puts us in the, I was going to say the holiday season, but you're not allowed to say that anymore. You have to say it's the Christmas season because reasons, even though Donald Trump Jr. was tweeting just the other day about how it was the holiday season, but don't worry about it. You're all going to be saying Christmas because truth, light, fairness, justice, the American way, etc. I don't know. Donald Trump said you were gonna, so I guess you're gonna. And, we made it. He didn't eat all the turkey, which I thought was a possibility. We haven't finished all of our turkey, which I thought was a possibility. So, I guess this is about the last day when I think I trust eating the turkey. I don't know. You can, let me know how long you eat leftover turkey and how long you think it's safe by tweeting to us at the KITM, Kagro in the Morning hashtag, if you like. If that's the way you'd like to spend your time this morning. Otherwise, we'll probably turn to the news and try and catch up on what happened over the weekend, the long weekend. I did leave behind two freshly pre-recorded shows for you on Thursday and Friday, but of course I forget all of the things that I said in them, even though I recorded them on Thursday and Friday. I guess on Wednesday and Thursday. I think I actually took Friday off, so that was nice. Had a little time with the family. I saw Coco. How about that? I did not know that Daily Kos affiliated cartoonist, I think he's still affiliated, yes, Lalo Alcaraz was actually a sort of cultural consultant on the film until I had seen it already, and I saw people tweeting about it. Specifically, I saw him retweeting other people's comments about the film. It was pretty good. I usually sleep through whatever they bring me to in on the movies in Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is about the only time I end up going to the movies throughout the year. I don't do the Jewish Christmas at the movies thing, as we're usually visiting in-laws and want to spend the time there at that point. But anyway, it was very good. I recommend it to you. I don't even know how long was it. I don't think it's brand new. It's been out a while, I think. I just haven't paid any attention to anything. And I figured I'd go along. Kids wanted to see the latest thing, or we wanted to go with their younger cousins, and that was the most family-appropriate thing. It was really good. So, good story. Well done. And I wasn't sure afterwards, we were all talking about, it was very interesting look at the Mexican tradition of Day of the Dead, which, I never really got my head around before because I'm not Mexican and I don't live near Mexico, and it didn't matter a great deal to me. I understood that it was a holiday and that was about it. And this was very, it was kind of like informative in a way. It's dumb to be learning your culture from a Disney movie, but it was reassuring in that at least now I sort of have some idea that it was culturally valid in some way, as opposed to just the Disney idea of it. So that was very nice. And by the way, you can follow along with Lalo. Here is he tweets as he uses his name as the address. Lalo, Lalo, Alcaraz, Alcaraz, and he uses. Since that incident between Trump and the judge, he's been using the Mexican judge moniker on his account. But anyway, he had apparently a great deal to do with it, and so that's kind of fun. And I didn't know that until afterwards, and it was really well done. So I recommend it to everybody. And if you've got time on your hands and haven't seen it yet, kids who want to see it, no kids, just go. I thought it was really nicely done. Anyway, that's not really news, but other things are. Let's see. Where are we this morning? Well, Bill in Portland, Maine, I usually allow him to set the tone for the show, right? I'll just read whatever he says. And that's basically it. So Daily Kos Radio is live now. I'm pleased to announce Kagro X, that's me, and that's how you can reach me on Twitter. reminds you to call your senators. Yes, there is actual business going on. And give them an earful about the Republican, or GOP, as we like to say, daylight robbery posing as a tax relief bill they're voting on this week. Serious message, seriously true. One of 10,000 things that you're not allowed to look at anything else about while this is going on. You can't take your eye off this one. You can't take your eye off the net neutrality one. You can't take your eye off, I don't know, any number of other things. And we'll discuss all of them and try and keep them all straight. And how come my Skype isn't? Oh, my goodness. You know what? Greg, hang on a second. I have failed to reactivate Skype on my main computer. So I'm going to ask you to call again. And or maybe I can connect. Let's see. Now, I missed your call, Greg. So if you're listening, just call again and everything will be fine. And I don't know why that happened, but for whatever reason, the buttons having moved around and everything, it was just a total disaster. But we'll see if we can't make that work. Okay. At any rate, so yes, lots happening over the weekend. Donald Trump took another 5-day break at Mar-a-Lago. I think it's the first time he's been back there since last winter, but you know how they do their seasons down there. And I think he was at the golf course 5 days in a row. Which is actually kind of relevant. I mean, it's not news, of course, that he's been, there we are, not news, of course, that he has been to the golf course, but 5 days in a row is something special for him. And I was reminded all weekend by the various things that are true about Donald Trump, true about the Trump administration, true about people he's supporting, i.e., Roy Moore's pedophilia, his own predations, and those of other prominent, politicians of all stripes, really, but he was only denying the Republican ones. As he was denying things for the press, I remind you again that we have been sleepwalking daily through his continued denials that he plays golf or watches television. I mean, those are not important per se, but he will, he'll be photographed by the press pool in golf attire, wearing golf spikes, getting into the car for a drive to his golf course with them loading clubs into the car and deny he's playing golf. A guy who does that, you don't have to worry about how valid his denials of his own predations are, of Roy Moore's predations, of anything, or that I'm cutting your taxes. I deny that I'm raising your taxes. You deny you're playing golf. I see you going to the golf course. You can't even be fooling me, because later on people will send me Instagram pictures of you on the golf course because they can see you out the back window of their house. It's not a secluded place. But the fact that you and your press corps or your press team continue to deny that you're doing that, what am I supposed to make of that? And the only possible answer is he's lying to you about everything. Literally, he's showing it to you. He's telling you. He's insisting that you regard him that way. Only now are some members of the press willing to come around to this, but even still, the majority of them are not. And so I guess I should have spent the morning, the last couple minutes saying, he mistakenly says he doesn't play golf. He erroneously told us that he's not watching television. He incorrectly mentioned that he didn't go to the golf course 5 days in a row and play with Tiger Woods or whatever. So I just wanted to get on the same page with all the rest of the journalists in the world, even though I don't consider myself one. But hey, why not? I'll just throw that out there this morning. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here, post-turkey himself. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. You know, the funny thing is, somebody gave him a golf outfit, just like the one he usually wears.
Yes.
But they told him it was a stealth outfit, and if he wears it, he'll be invisible.
And he believes that.
And he believes that, just like he believes that the stealth fighter actually is invisible and cannot be seen. That's what he told the Coast Guard.
It's amazing. No one can see you. And I don't think the Coast Guard has any of those plans, so I don't think they cared about that.
Well, you wouldn't know if they did, right? And
That's
so,
true. And neither would they.
They came and but he was there. They probably showed him an empty hangar and said, look, this is our stealth fighter. You can't even see it.
The contractors are going crazy about this. They must be loving it. You know what? You owe us for 1 million of these fighters.
Not only that, the guy who does the paint job is like complaining about it because they didn't like it.
It's a great scam.
So somebody told Trump that he was invisible. He believes it. He goes out and he golfs, and he says, "No one can see me," and yet everybody can.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to tell him.
He's having meetings. Okay.
The other thing I was enjoying this morning when I was looking at the headlines getting ready for the show is this one from joe.co.uk. It says, breaking, successful actress Meghan Markle to wed former soldier. Her fiancé is a lucky man.
I did. I saw that this morning. I saw the announcement first somewhere, some gossip thing or whatever, made it through into my feed about that's Prince Harry of the United Kingdom is marrying Meghan Markle. And I did not know who she was, but, what do I'm not marrying her. It's all right with me if I don't know who he's marrying.
Right, the important thing is he knows who she is.
Yeah, right. They seem nice. I don't know. He was once photographed dressed up as a Nazi for Halloween. That's not good, typically speaking. But you can't fire a prince, so I guess he's okay. And she seems nice, and I understand she's like a normal person and everything. So that might actually, she's an actress. So, but anyway, it might be a nice addition. I don't care because I don't have royalty and they're not mine and whatever. But it's an interesting bit of news for sure.
So
and I love that write-up of it.
Yeah, other random tweets that I was reading this morning. This one is from Zara Rahim, who's a communications specialist, Vogue magazine, Clinton campaign, Barack Obama alum. She writes, just left Orlando. The man who checked me into my hotel was a teacher from Puerto Rico and moved there a month ago because he lost everything in Maria. Oh. I said I hope he re-registered to vote, and he replied with a smile, "It was the first thing I did."
Yeah, I bet. Good for him. That's fantastic news. I like that. Oh,
so I like starting the day off well.
That's a good one. That's nice and light. Oh, by the way, I did see one thing in that article that you mentioned, the write-up of the royal marriage. I like there was a bit at the end where it says Windsor, the former soldier, is now unemployed, but he does some charity work.
Yeah, always
so
nice to know. It is good because even if you have nothing, you should give back.
Yeah.
So from the pundit roundup today, I was looking at the fight over calling the voter rolls that the New York Times covered.
Okay.
And I'm debating whether to talk about it with you on the show just because it's just so odd. But the Times had a Normalize the Nazis piece.
Oh, yes, right.
Which got quite a bit of feedback. And I just might mention it and then tell you about the Atlantic parody that showed up, which I thought were quite good. So the article is A Voice of Hate in America's Heartland. Tony Hovater, a 29-year-old welder, helped form a pro-Nazi group. It's not a pro-Nazi group; it's a Nazi group.
Oh,
it's one of the problems with the articles is that it kind of downplays some of his actual Nazi, parts of him.
Pro-Nazi, that's bad.
It's a Nazi group.
Yeah, right. I mean, was Hitler pro-Nazi? Yeah, right. I guess.
So what happened from that? So this is this Reader Center bulletin board. Readers accuse us, that's the New York Times, of normalizing a Nazi sympathizer. We respond, and we talked about how difficult it was to get this piece right, is what they did. And then there's a piece from the actual author who said, I interviewed a white nationalist, and sometimes a soul and its shape remains obscure to both writer and reader, and I tried to get at why he was like this, and I couldn't do it. So it's interesting that they felt obligated to put those sort of things up, and that was part and parcel of the criticism that the article was getting. I have some other nice criticism of it too, but this one is a James Hamlin piece that appeared in Atlantic entitled, Nazis are just like you and me, except they're Nazis.
Right, that's the difference.
Right? The water's almost ready, he said, bending down to look for the little bubbles. Once you see the bubbles rising to the surface, you know the water's hot enough to cook the pasta. Steve Stevenson dispenses wisdom freely, though he is not a chef. He's 32 years old and drinks whole milk, and his tattoos are nonviolent. The kitchen spice rack contains only garlic powder. He wears jeans made of denim. The T-shirt on his back has a tag sticking out, and it says 100% cotton. What I can say, jokes Stevenson, as he sees me taking note of the spice rack, I like garlic powder. And we both chuckle.
Oh, That's good news.
Right?
That's
Some
good
people
news
disagree
right
with, the Jews control all the money in the world, would be better off if they were dead, he says, petting the dog. Who's a good boy? The question is rhetorical, I ask, about his wallpaper. Some people disagree with Stevenson's political views. He's a nice enough guy, said the local grocer. Butch Tarmac, a registered Democrat. He buys apples and pancake mix. I also like these things, but I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on the bit about the one true race cleansing the soil and commanding what is rightfully theirs.
Okay. We can leave that aside.
Hitler gets a bad rap, but he was a pretty righteous dude, he says, half addressing me and half addressing his 4 wide-eyed children. We're all crammed into the booth like a bunch of sardines. He tells me only to refer to him and his Nazi friends as the Traditionalist Worker Party, and I agree to do that. And there is a Traditionalist Working Party, and that's part of the shtick of the guy who was profiled in the Times.
Okay.
And so this is from Angus Johnston. Angus Johnston is a historian, also advocate of American student activism at CUNY in New York City University. One more quick thing about that New York Times profile of Hovatar. That's the fellow. Remember the podcast the author mentions? I listened to a couple of episodes. Here's the sole quote from the podcast that appears in the New York Times piece. It says, "We need to have more families. We need to be able to just be normal," said Matthew Heimbach, the leader of the Traditionalist Worker Party. In a podcast conversation with Mr. Hovatar, why, he asked self-mockingly, were there so many followers abnormal? Mr. Hovatar replied, I mean, honestly, it takes people with sort of an odd view of life at first to come this way, because most people are pacified really easy, Like, here's some money, here's a nice TV, go watch your sports, He added, the fact that we're seeing more and more normal people come is because things have gotten so bad, and if they keep getting worse, we'll keep getting more just normal people, remember, called normies.
Yes.
And Angus Johnson points out that's not representative of the show's content.
Oh.
Heimbach does most of the talking on the podcast. Hovatar is the fellow that was interviewed. Hovatar is mostly his sidekick and foil. I never heard him disagree, but here's what I did hear. Heimbach is obsessed with Jews, with supposed Jewish domination of society. He uses the phrase the Jew a lot. He's a big fan of Hitler.
Oh.
He drops quotes multiple times into both episodes, usually banal ones, as Adolf Hitler says. Oh. Both of them are aggressively hostile toward gays and feminists, aspects of the bigotry that are never mentioned in the Times piece, and it's clear they're hoping for and working toward a Nazi takeover of the U.S. Heimbach uses the term Weimerica, like in Weimar Republic, to describe the U.S. today. And the themes of the podcast aren't absent from the piece. They're alluded to rather than illustrated. What emerges in the podcast and what is absent from the story is a clear sense of Heimbach and Hovatar's organizing project and their political vision. So as I said in my previous thread, these guys aren't Nazi sympathizers, as the article puts it. They're Nazis. They're Nazis, and they're Nazis organizing other Nazis.
But it's so hard to say that.
Apparently,
so I don't know. It's 4 letters, but
I think that's kind of important, though. So I think that's really where that sort of stuff goes. Here's a December 2017 issue of The Atlantic with Luke O'Brien writing, "The Making of an American Nazi. How did Andrew Anglin go from being an anti-racist Began to the alt-right's most vicious troll and propagandist, and how might he be stopped?" Kind of a different approach to the question, how do you cover Nazis? I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it. They exist in the U.S. They're a very tiny minority. We shouldn't overblow, how many people they represent, but they can certainly get get on the wrong side of things, is what happened with Charlottesville, with a death of somebody who was protesting them. But describing them as vicious and then talking about who they are, to me, seems to be a much better approach than, they're just like us. And if you're going to do the just like us, don't forget to add, but they're Nazis.
Right. That seems like an important thing.
I think that, that's still an unacceptable thing to be.
I wish that was true everywhere, but it's important that we know how they eat, where they shop, for reasons unknown.
Right. So I thought that was worth discussing this morning, a whole, series of articles there, so you can put them all together and read as you wish. Now, some people are reading it and saying, well, it's good that we were told about this and don't pick on the New York Times. But, I think it's of note that even the New York Times felt like they had to defend this.
Well, there was certainly enough uproar that they had to say something about it. I guess they could have ignored it, I suppose. But yeah, I'm surprised by it. And I did see a number of people, some of whom I, actually know and like saying, well, no, it's important that the New York Times tell us about such things, and it's important we know they're out there. But how you could miss it at this point, I have no idea. They just murdered somebody in the street in Charlottesville. I don't know what you need to see. The fact that they show up at there with, in combat gear and with makeshift weapons and shields and whatnot. And although they don't have swastikas on the shields, the imagery is unmistakable. If you've missed it to this point, I don't know that I need your help with anything.
They don't always have swastikas, but they have these eagles.
Yeah.
These stylized
tridents, eagles. It's unmistakable imagery. Sometimes they do have swastikas, but, if you've not yet registered what's going on, it's great to have you on the side, whatever, you'll sign up for being anti-Nazi and everything, but I don't number you among my necessary allies if you haven't noticed yet. I'll take your help, but, read it somewhere else, man. Get out of the way and let's have some real news in this paper.
Right. What's the difference between everybody else and a Nazi? One of you is a Nazi.
Other than that.
So shifting gears, but only slightly, here's a great piece by Rick Wilson about Roy Moore. And it was interesting. I was reading, I couldn't find the exact quote, but I was reading some of the conservative commentary on Twitter this morning, which went along the lines of, it'll be interesting to see what happens if Roy Moore actually loses fairly substantially, because that will be a knock on liberal commentary who will be shocked because they never gave Alabama the chance to actually be normal and reasonable, something along those lines.
Oh, I see.
Not me. I think he'll lose, and I don't know that he'll lose big, but I think he'll lose, and I'm not going to be Alabama bashing. I don't think that's, fair. I can bash his supporters, but not all of Alabama. I can bash core Trump voters, not everybody who voted for him, because, the slice that didn't, who changed their mind, who realize that they made a mistake, that's fine. An interesting other phenomenon, maybe we should talk about more, is whenever somebody comes out and trashes Trump, who happens to be a conservative, I don't think that the first reaction ought to be, well, where were you 5 years ago, 10 years ago? You created him, yada, yada. I still think that it's worth encouraging folks to do that. If you don't encourage them, how can you expect more people to do that? The Jeff Flakes of the world. This latest one was Michael Hayden.
Yes.
Who was very upset with Trump trashing CNN International. Just at the same time that Putin put them on one of his lists of suspect international organizations. So Putin is attacking from his end and Donald Trump is attacking from his end. And Michael Hayden said, if, I'm not seeing, to paraphrase him, if I'm not seeing a president of the United States stand up for the First Amendment, I basically wasted the last 40 years of my life.
Yes, that is his feeling.
That is his feeling. So, encourage that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But what does Trump do?
Sure.
He does unforgivable things. This is Rick Wilson. Roy Moore is deplorable, and Donald Trump condoning his sins is unforgivable.
Okay.
The judge's behavior is unforgivable no matter what your ideologic leanings and party identification may be. One of of course, he's describing things we already know. I don't mind this kind of article about things we already know. But he's got a great paragraph here about Kellyanne Conway and his descriptor of her. He says, it took Kellyanne Conway, a woman whose soulless serial lying has become the entirety of her personality, to grab the controls of the Trump plane and send it crashing to the ground faster than Roy Moore's pants as he lurks under the bleachers at a high school cheerleading practice. In an appearance on Fox and Friends, which is in the White House, has an audience of one, Conway argued for Dirty Roy, saying, I'm telling you, we want the voters in the Senate to get this tax bill through.
Yeah.
Even the Fox News host had a moment of stunned silence, perhaps shocked that a senior counselor to the President of the United States was defending Alabama's Uncle Creepy, perhaps hypnotized by the last tiny shred of Conway's integrity begin vaporizing live on television in service to Steve Bannon's handpicked candidate. For far too many on the conservative side of the fence, the defenses of Moore have taken on one of two strained, agonizingly contradictory themes. The first is Moore's bad, but Doug Jones will vote with the Democrats. This is tribal whataboutism at its peak. Doug Jones isn't going to be the deciding vote on squat in the U.S. Senate. He's there for 2 years at most if the good people of Alabama can nominate a Republican candidate who isn't a kid-fondling reptile. The second, blisteringly stupid argument is that this is some kind of grand conspiracy theory, and the real villain in the story of Moore's victims is, wait for it, the news media. The argument, as tiresome as it is predictable, and what remains of the ruins of the conservative movement comes down to this. Well, Roy Moore may be a guy who likes to have teen girls touch his junk in his backwoods love shack, but hey, the Washington Post is worse, am I right?
Oh, okay, well.
So I think that pretty much sums it up. It's a really, really excellent article.
Well, yeah. I mean, any Roy Moore bashing at this point is certainly welcome. You can't get enough of that. And we're gonna have to wait and see. I guess I've played both sides of the fence on whether or not I don't know whether I should say I believe whether or not I believe he's going to win, but whether or not I am being reasonable in my fear that he's going to win. But I mean, I guess I'm coming around to the possibility that he just won't, because it's just that bad. And I did, tweet just not that long ago that people in Alabama frequently do the right things, and Doug Jones is a famous and accomplished prosecutor because they agreed to do those right things at his behest, and that's a pretty good setup for an election.
Well, again, it's all about turnout. We'll see who votes. It's December 12th. It's not that far away.
Okay. By the way, we have our break coming up in just a bit. I haven't started our music yet. We're about 30 seconds, but
good.
Case
we'll remind you,
it doesn't come through.
Today's the last day to register, I believe, in Alabama, and we'll just give you going out. Tim Miller, who was Jeb Bush's spokesperson and an ex-Republican. Roy Moore is worse and an abuser of children. He's an abuser of children who also is a hateful bigot. He believes himself to be above the law, was removed from his judgeship twice before he decided the rule of law didn't apply to him. He's an abuser of children who advanced the racist lie that the first black president was born in Africa. He's an abuser of children, who for generations has shamed and belittled gay Alabamians who were struggling to be true to themselves and their partners.
All right,
we
just hit our mark there. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have to tell Greg that we're back because he can't even hear the cue of the music returning us back to our quiet background. But we're back, and break is over, and we didn't do a damn thing with it. Okay. So, where were we? We were just finishing up. You got through the larger part of Tim Miller's quote from the Crooked.com article. The Republican, right. Or was it it wasn't Tim Miller's? Was it Tim Miller's article or no? Or he was just tweeting that about.
I was just finishing up what he was saying.
Yeah.
But here's a nice piece where I guess somebody told on MSNBC they were interviewing people about would you vote for Roy Moore, and this fellow says, I would rather be mauled by badgers than vote for Roy Moore. Now, there were a couple of polls out that showed that Moore establishing a lead again, but they're very suspect, dodgy polls.
Oh.
You could tell when you start reading Roy Moore is up again by 2 points, and then you read the summary of what the poll shows, and the poll summary reads along the lines of, this shows that the left-wing agenda that is trying to be foisted on us by Washington is not working. And you scratch your head and say, okay, let me ignore this poll. Yeah. So we still need data. We still don't know what's going on there, but it should be out soon. The election, that is.
Oh.
And what is the whole thing about Roy Moore's position and seat in the Senate right now? It's all about this tax bill. But the tax bill, isn't that going to be voted on like last week, you say? Well, it hasn't been. I'm not exactly sure when the vote is scheduled for. People are talking about it possibly being this week.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing again.
But I would respectfully point out something to you, who is the process master, and that is that if they had the votes, they would have voted on it last week.
You would think. I mean, they are in a huge rush, so I'm not certain why they wouldn't. They don't need to wait for anything. There's no process that they have to worry about, or no
I'll tell you what they have
need
to wait
do
for. They have to wait for those 6 votes they don't have.
Yeah, well, if it's 6, then they really do have to wait. We'll see whether they get anything done this week, but I don't see it
Jerry
anywhere.
Moran is making undecided noises. I'm cognizant of what people saw happen in Kansas, he says.
That's
good.
Good.
From a Kansas paper. Here's the direct quote. I'm also cognizant of what people saw happen in Kansas. The issue with tax cuts would be easier if you actually had faith that Congress would hold the line on spending. It's 2 components. And then they go on to say in 2012, Brownback signed a bill eliminating state income tax, and revenue losses weren't matched by economic gains, forcing lawmakers to balance the budget for years with funds earmarked for highways, education, and other programs. The 2017 legislature overrode the GOP governor to repeal the tax break and to raise individual income tax rates. That's in support of Jerry Moran's comments.
Yeah.
So Moran, Corker, Flake, McCain, Collins, and Murkowski, as well as noises by Ron Johnson, who everybody doesn't believe.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a number of votes out there that are in play. It's not clear that they have the votes. I'm not predicting it fails. I'm just saying that it's really unclear. And if they had those votes, they'd be voting last week.
You would think. I mean, it's I don't know.
They want to get it done as soon as possible. Yeah. They said they wanted it done before Thanksgiving. They couldn't. It wasn't done before Thanksgiving. Why wasn't it done before Thanksgiving? Occam's razor, Trump's razor. They don't have the votes.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't really another explanation. There's no committee hearings to finish. There's no report to wait for. They said they weren't going to wait for the CBO, and CBO is catching up to them. So, you know, it's only going to get worse. The only reason the reason they said they weren't going to wait for the CBO is if once the CBO actually got a chance to weigh in on the thing, the odds were just going to get worse.
Well, and that's in fact what's happening. The CBO is weighing in, and there is some stuff out this morning that other people who are looking at this are saying that, you know what, everything we said about it, it's worse. Yeah.
I mean, every minute anybody has to take a look at this thing is...
For example, this is from the Washington Post this morning. Senate GOP tax bill hurts the poor more than originally thought, CBO finds.
Okay. Have you got that one on your list?
No, but I'm about to.
Yeah, send it to me. I'll take a look at that. We got to catch up on that. And I only got a few minutes in on it during the Thursday and Friday break, and there's been a lot of great writing on it, uncovering. A lot of it is a little bit repetitive, but every once in a while they come up with, each day you get to read further in.
Right, and I'm sending you another one, which I did have, but I'm going to add to it so you can do this too. And it's called In Tax Debate, Gift to Religious Right Could Be Bargaining Chip. Basically getting rid of the Johnston rule.
Yes.
So that's something else you can talk about. What is that rule? What's the deal there?
Yeah, well, this is, I guess, the up until this, I guess, nonprofits in general, but churches in particular, prohibited from engaging in overt political activity and still maintaining their nonprofit tax-exempt status. And apparently, gee whiz, the Trump troops want that out of the way. Although I'm not certain it's going to work out for them entirely. But I assume that they will also apply the law less than even-handedly and arrest anybody who says from the pulpit that they ought to vote for Democrats.
Right, and so that's making Jim Lankford from Oklahoma, Republican from Oklahoma, uncomfortable.
Oh, my.
I mean, there's a number of votes for this tax bill that are difficult. And so, again, they don't have the votes, and so we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll get them.
Good. Well,
but they don't have them now.
Okay.
If they had them now, they'd be voting this morning. That's my position. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Then the last thing that although I have some very encouraging Republicans flee from McConnell in 2018 primaries, and a little bit about the difficulties that Republicans had in Virginia, why a historically conservative county in Virginia is making national Republicans nervous. Mm-hmm. That's Chesterfield County. For the first time since 1961, Chesterfield County backed a Democrat for governor. And the driving forces in the Richmond suburb included women who defiantly trumpeted a political label their party has ducked for decades. And so that is to say Democrats. So that's interesting locally for you. But the piece that I want to end on for my segment is the kabuki dance about what to do about John Conyers and to a lesser extent Al Franken.
Yeah, we haven't caught up with Conyers, really.
Conyers has stepped down from the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee.
Yes, still in Congress, but...
He's still in Congress, as our friend Dana Houle points out. Congressional figures, Congress critters, are entities unto themselves. I mean, they don't have a boss. You can't fire them. Pelosi can't fire Congress, and they can't fire Conyers. They can't fire individual members. How do you get individual members out? You got to expel them. That takes 2/3.
Right.
Not going to happen. So you got to talk him into getting out. How do you talk him into getting out? You try not to embarrass him in public. So Nancy Pelosi is trying to get Conyers to step down and negotiating with Conyers' office about how to get him out. And she does that behind the scenes while praising him on television because, like, who doesn't like to get praised? Ask Donald Trump.
Right, that seems true.
On the other hand, praising him too effusively gets Democrats and like everybody upset. Why are you defending somebody who had all of these sexual misconduct judgments against him? This isn't just a random accusation. He settled in court multiple times, according to the stories.
Yeah.
How could you defend him? Pelosi called him an icon. People got upset when she did that on Meet the Press.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Cosby was an icon.
Right, exactly. So what's that got to do with it? So she actually wound up tweeting out something along the lines of icon or not. People need to be responsible for what they do. And here's an interesting piece about all of this, which is in Politico. Conyers' allegations put Pelosi in tight spot. Democratic colleagues wanted Conyers to leave his high-profile House post, but didn't want to be seen as forcing him out. And they talk about the extreme defense he gets from the Congressional Black Caucus, which Conyers helped found.
Yes.
So as a founding member, he has a lot of credibility there. And that's why you see people like Jim Clyburn defending him in public. Again, big mistakes, I think, on the part of leadership. I don't think they're really this sounds tone deaf to everybody else. But I think that's a lot of what's going on. What they say in public to praise and defend him isn't matched by what they're doing behind the scenes to try to get him out. So keep that in mind and don't get too mad at them. It is tone deaf. They really ought to recalibrate and adjust that. I think that they're losing the public who is looking for bright lines about the difference between one party and another party by trying to blur that. On the other hand, they do seem to be doing the right thing by getting behind the scenes and trying to get these folks out.
Yeah. I mean, one of the more interesting guesses about what was going on in terms of describing what was happening is Pelosi sees it as her role, and it is correct that it is the role of the party leader to sometimes get out there and say, like, I'm going to say something that I know is actually going to get me in some trouble, but it's going to get me to the result I want, if this is what's going on. And this is all still suppositions.
Right. Here's the article. Yeah. Privately, Pelosi's been working behind the scenes with leaders of the CBC and Conyers to figure out his next steps. One senior Democratic aide said she was trying to lay the groundwork for him to step aside gracefully.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you said, but if that's in fact what's going on,
we don't know. It's behind the scenes. Two, there are certainly going to be those who say forget gracefully, but she's got a lot of like I said, as I've said in the past, a lot of moving parts to this. There's going to be a significant portion of the membership that says out, yes, but gracefully. Now they may be wrong, but she's working in service to this very disparate membership. And, it would also remember that it would be extraordinarily unseemly, for instance, in the middle of all these other accusations to say, all right, well, you've accused a white senator, a Democrat on the one hand, and a black congressman on the other hand, and the only one who's leaving is the black guy. So, you want to approach this with some caution here and say, all right, well, we don't have to drag him through the mud necessarily. You can drag him through the mud later if you want to dig into what the accusations actually were. And I suppose there's good reason to air that, but that doing so does produce some unreasonable reactions in people. Sometimes they'll dig in their heels and fight unreasonably if you make it about a personal affront to them before they actually resign. So there's some possibility anyway that Nancy Pelosi is saying, I will take one for the team. I'm going to be unpopular and say the wrong thing publicly to get the right result privately. Maybe that's it. Maybe she's just not with it in the same way that the rest of us are. But she's dealing with a disparate caucus and a lot of pressures that never, ever, ever will come to light. It makes it all that much easier to, make up reasons, but very often
but also to criticize. It also is easier to criticize if you don't really know what's going on. From this article, here's some of that back channel stuff. Which is
by the way,
kind of
the criticism is an okay part and moving part of that puzzle too, to push back. That's all right.
And she felt obligated to push back to that, so that's all good. From this article, second-ranking Democrat Jerry Nadler.
Yeah, that's not a bad swap.
And Representative Zoe
Ideologically, yes.
Another senior member, have been privately jockeying to succeed Conyers.
Yes.
Well, if they're jockeying to succeed Conyers, that kind of, is a point in favor of, this really was happening, and there is a lot of, pushing him out, moving him out gracefully kind of stuff. Otherwise, they wouldn't be jockeying.
That's true. They wouldn't know yet.
Nadler is widely assumed to become the acting ranking member now that Conyers has stepped down, but Democratic sources say allies of Lofgren are pushing for her to take over the top spot. Here's where it's interesting from a process point of view. Democratic caucus rules say the next most senior Democrat, Nadler in this case, automatically assumes the post if a ranking member or chairman is indicted.
Oh, okay.
This isn't an indictment, so what happens now?
Yeah, that's true. Well, the assumption usually is that the weight is with the ranking, but... and
that's probably what will happen, but it's interesting that there is no mechanism.
Right.
You'd think in all the years of Congress there'd be a mechanism.
Yeah, I guess so. Although, an open contest for it isn't a terrible mechanism. If you want to know the outcome of the open contest, generally speaking, 99% of the time you'll get it right by looking at how much money they've given away. Yeah.
You've taught me that. I remember. I listen to you.
Yeah, okay. Good.
I try to remember what you taught me.
Yeah, they're both
follow the money.
They've both given away a considerable amount of money, and it wouldn't be it'll be a persuasive argument also if it's close, money wise, to say it wouldn't look so terrible to have a woman step into this role right here, right now, given why we have a vacancy.
Exactly right. Jackie Speier, who has some moral authority on this because she's not only come public, but she's also sponsoring a bill to clean things up in Congress, is fine with Conyers. She thinks that Conyers should step down from Congress if the allegations are true. And she thinks it's a reasonable process to send it to ethics so long as ethics is going to move swiftly.
Yeah, and they might because he's a Democrat, and they split the ethics committee evenly, and or relatively evenly. I don't even think it's totally even in the House. I'm not sure now that I think about it, but the Republicans will have no reason to drag their feet as they might if it was a Republican. But I think everybody hopes to avoid going that route and that he'll resign before, but that's just another pressure point. If you want to leave it up to the ethics committee, fine, but you could also moot the whole thing by leaving.
Right. So bottom line is I think that there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that we don't see. And I think that in following what happens, one thing to do is follow the Lofgren issue in regard to her and Jerry Nadler in terms of who gets the post. Another thing is looking to see how the Congressional Black Caucus responds to all of this. And I think both of those will give you pretty good clues as to what's going on.
Yeah, I think so.
And in this case, Nancy Pelosi is the face of this in terms of leadership. She's going to be open for criticism. Part of her job is to be the lightning rod for that kind of criticism while she arranges things behind the scenes. And it's just another reminder that a Speaker of the House and even a minority leader is a difficult job. And she does it well. She has done it well in the past. And, temper the criticism with some thought behind what's actually going on is all I'm saying. It doesn't mean that she was right to, call him an icon and be so blunt about it. But on the other hand, if that's what you need to grease the wheels, well, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Sometimes you got to get out there and do something that is makes you a lightning rod, and it hurts. Hopefully, only briefly if you know what you're doing, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
Interesting stuff, I think. And anyway, with that, I will leave you with the tax articles. And just thanks for this Thanksgiving. Thanks for having the show and having me on all this time.
Thanks.
Letting me interrupt you all these times, all these years. This is great work, and speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. How's remodeling at Kagro World Headquarters going?
Well, I think we're actually, the
bulk
of the work is done. I'm not. I'm out of the basement. That's good. We'll see whether or not things continue. Of course, now begins the process of come back and fix this thing and fix that thing. So I think work during the show is over.
Good.
But,
well, houses are never done. I mean, it's not like you finish the house and then there's nothing to do. That never happens.
Right. Yeah, they're already knocking on the door wanting to know if we want to replace roof or windows. I just did the inside. Get out of here.
Yeah, exactly right. Take care, and I will talk to you on Wednesday.
All right. Thanks very much, Greg. We'll see if we can't engineer things to be more correct via Skype by next time. While we were talking here, I've just been trying to scroll down. There we go. I don't know whether these are in what order do they put these things in. I'm looking at opensecrets.org. Opensecrets.org, of course, a project of the Center for Responsive Politics and a great source of information on fundraising, FEC reports, etc., and disbursements, more to our interest here, inside Congress and in presidential races. If you go to opensecrets.org, let's see, how's the path go from here? You come to the front page. There's politicians and elections menu here. You click on Congress, and after you get to Congress, there are different sections. I'm looking at the leadership PACs under the Congress section, and I guess these are roughly in order of the total amount of money, total contributions to candidates is what I'm looking at right now. And just sort of scrolling down. So they're roughly in order. Yeah, they're in order. I mean, they ought to be. I'm sure it was done by spreadsheet or something. Roughly in order of amount of money contributed to total to different candidates. Leadership PACs. I mean, in case you're relatively new to the show, just to kind of catch you up on this. This will be sort of old hat to longtime listeners of this show. But when you're trying to figure out what's going to happen in a leadership election, and here we're talking about races for speaker, if you're in the majority, for minority leader, for minority whip, for, whatever it is, any of the positions, whips, chief deputy whip, and also sometimes for if there's an open contest for the chair of a committee, as there might be in this case. Usually, although when it's chairmanships of committees, very frequently I guess you could certainly say the tie goes to the highest ranking member of whichever party you're talking about. But it's not always the case, and sometimes the seniority is pretty close. But in case you're looking for an extra clue in figuring out which contestant is likely to win. And this was dispositive for those of you who have been involved in Democratic politics for some time. You may remember way back in, I don't even know what year it was, but way back towards the beginning of towards the beginning of the widespread backlash to the Iraq War, a leadership contest inside the Democratic caucus, the House Democratic caucus, for the second ranking slot in the leadership behind Pelosi, a contest between Steny Hoyer and Congressman Murtha. And the question was whether the lines would break down ideologically, and whether those who had opposed the war from the beginning or from early on would line up behind Murtha, who eventually did come out in strong opposition to the war and was doing so from the standpoint of a veteran, for which, and a longtime chair of I don't remember, Defense Appropriations, I think was where he was parked. He was a great booster of the military as a veteran and as a congressman, and yet had come out strongly in opposition to the war, and Hoyer had not. And it was a question of, a lot of people wanted to frame it as a question of, this will determine the future course, the platform, essentially, the policy, the war policy of Democrats in Congress. And I can see why they would think so, but I don't know that it was really the case. And they figured, okay, those in strong opposition to the war will back Murtha, and those either not strongly in opposition or who don't care one way or the other somehow about that, at least in terms of this question of who will occupy this leadership spot, will perhaps otherwise back Hoyer in all this. But I thought the real determination of the race was going to come down to, as it always had, I didn't invent this metric, the amount of money that the two contestants had in the past given to current members of the House Democratic caucus who were going to be voting in this question. How much had you given them for their campaigns? How helpful had you been in getting them where they were today, putting them in a position to vote, obviously. And that did turn out to be the answer. Much, much, much more money had been contributed to members and their races in the past by Steny Hoyer than by Jack Murtha. And there was no way Murtha was ever going to catch up. In fact, it had only been a recent thing that Murtha had formed a leadership pack at all, and he had given next to nothing over the lifetime of his leadership pack versus what Hoyer had done. Hoyer had, in other words, laid the groundwork. You know what? This was a great microcosm for, where I don't mean to relitigate it again, but the Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders thing. Inside the ranks of the party, the question wasn't necessarily primarily ideological. It was primarily a question of, who has helped you the most, or with whom are you the most familiar? And Bernie Sanders came into a situation where he was competing against someone who had been involved in the Democratic Party proper for decades and had raised and distributed millions and millions and millions of dollars, which, we don't like to lay it at the feet of the millions and millions of dollars, but that's just a reality. That actually makes a big difference in people's lives when they're running very expensive campaigns. And Bernie Sanders had not done that. And it may be that he may do it yet in the future. I don't know how much energy he's got to put into that. I don't know that he really believes in doing that. But it was a driver of the decision-making, just as it was a driver of the decision-making here. And lots of people were hugely disappointed by the fact that Murtha lost. But if you broke down how the votes went, there were a lot of members who were ideologically far more liberal, who were greatly enthusiastic about Murtha's opposition to the war, and who were very vocal about appreciating his opposition to the war and denigrating, quite honestly, occasionally, Hoyer's continuing support for it, but who nonetheless voted for Hoyer for that leadership spot, because it all comes down eventually to how much have you done to make it possible for me to have a perch here in Congress to say these things? And that's not a nonsensical way of looking at things. Anyway, so with that in mind, you could take a look at the leading leadership PACs. And again, I guess by way of definition, for those who aren't familiar, a leadership PAC is a PAC or political action committee formed by usually members of Congress, but not necessarily exclusively members of Congress, for the purpose of gathering up campaign contributions and distributing them to the campaigns of colleagues and aspiring colleagues to try to get them elected to Congress, and also hopefully to align them behind you in your bid for leadership. I'm not leading by helping you necessarily. That's not what we mean by leadership, although that's a great way to point, and you can wink and say, yeah, that's what it is. I'm providing leadership. And you are. But they're primarily about getting somebody into the leadership of one of their, whichever party they belong to, and keeping them there. And of course, I mean, I guess you could say, well, that's just another definition of leadership. Helping other members of your party and doing party building and building the bench only helps bolster your case, both for leadership within the party and your party's leadership in Congress. Anyway, so this list over here on Open Secrets will give you a rough idea of who's spending what. Well, it'll give you a very specific idea of who's spending what, but it'll give you a rough idea of how many people they will have helped with their money. It doesn't say how many candidates got contributions, and that's an important factor too, because after all, a contribution very frequently leads to a vote in Congress, and that's what you're counting, not the amount of dollars that were handed out. But, and we're a little bit late to our break music here. But at any rate, this will give you some idea of who might win this way. And I guess what I'm saying here is I'm going to lead up to the break and keep you on the edge of your seat until we can find out, unless you're already scrolling, who spent more, Zoe Lofgren or Jerry Nadler. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Oops, I've accidentally opened our soundboard on the other computer. We don't need it there. Let's get rid of it and bring our music back down when we left off before this very short break. And I always appreciate the very short break, although not the difficulty of getting rid of this music. I can tell you that. Anyway, I was explaining to you the importance of leadership PACs and how to use the rough guides of Open Secrets to predict who might win a race. So, all things being equal, and assuming that a committee chairmanship in this situation that was openly contested between two people of more or less equal rank in terms of seniority, and I don't know exactly when the two of them were both elected, and why Nadler has the greater seniority. They may have both been elected at the same time. Sometimes by the way, they measure seniority by service on the committee, typically speaking, rather than service in Congress, but that also is a good tiebreaker. So scrolling down the list, by the way, the top, the largest leadership PAC out there is Kevin McCarthy's by far. He has dispersed a total of $2,086,513. I don't know whether we're looking at are we talking about lifetime, or are we talking, because it seems like pretty low actually for lifetime, versus maybe this was the 2016 election cycle. Yeah, that's probably it. So, I mean, even there, you're not going to have a very clear picture of their lifetime contributions. And so if you want to figure it out, you're going to have to add it up for as many election cycles as you can find. It only sometimes makes a difference. But generally speaking, for quick and dirty, you can just look at their rankings to figure out who's spending more. By the way, so McCarthy actually outranks Paul Ryan by some considerable amount. And also, by the way, PAC names, they usually give them some kind of usually pretty stupid name, sometimes making it obvious that it's affiliated with a certain member of Congress. Like, for instance, Paul Ryan might choose to, he didn't, but he might choose to make the name of his PAC something that would have the acronym Paul or something dumb like that. In fact, his is called Prosperity Action, which, you could see him naming it Prosperity Action for United Leadership, right? Something dumb like that. Paul PAC. You get the idea. He hasn't done that. Majority Committee PAC is Kevin McCarthy's. He's above the $2 million mark. Prosperity Action, Paul Ryan's PAC, $1.3 million. Now, ordinarily you might expect that would be reversed because Paul Ryan occupies the top seat. But you can actually explain some of that. One, Paul Ryan is sort of already sitting in the catbird seat. And so what you really would want to figure out, if there had been an open contest for the speakership, which it wasn't really the case when Boehner resigned. It was pretty much a done deal already for Ryan. But if you added up the amount of money that they've contributed over the lifetime of their leadership PACs, you might find that, especially prior to his election, Paul Ryan was spending much more than Kevin McCarthy. And Kevin McCarthy will likewise has reason to have the largest majority or largest leadership PAC out there because he is now presumably after the biggest possible prize in congressional leadership, the speakership itself. And so one day when Paul Ryan leaves Congress for whatever reason, when he's finally defeated by the Iron Mustache or retires or whatever, McCarthy, if the Republicans are still, even if they're not in the majority, he'll be pursuing their top spot. And so he's got the biggest job ahead of him. He'll be spending the most money. Paul Ryan is kind of resting on his laurels at this point and relying on the fact that it would be a big black eye publicly for Republicans to oust another speaker and leaving it at that. Okay, so our third ranking leadership PAC is, in fact, Steny Hoyer. He's the only other member to have topped the $1 million mark and I'm looking at figures for the 2016 election cycle. You can flip between different election cycles pretty easily on this page. The 2018 figures have Paul Ryan, as a matter of fact, back on top, $975,000 already this election cycle, followed closely by Kevin McCarthy at $825,000. And unsurprisingly, taking third place now, Mark Meadows with the House Freedom Fund, trying to trade on his House Freedom Caucus fame. He's just under the $500,000 mark for this election cycle. But looking at the last full completed election cycle, you can scroll down and start to look for who's given the most money as between, say, Zoe Lofgren and Jerry Nadler. And you have to go way down the list in order to get there. Are you interested in the names that occupied the list for 2016? Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan, Steny Hoyer, we mentioned. Steve Scalise, with his Eye of the Tiger PAC was next. Mark Meadows and the House Freedom Fund. Patrick McHenry, believe it or not, with his More Conservatives PAC, occupies the next spot. Kirsten Gillibrand, John Boehner still maintained one during the 2016 election cycle. Probably still some money left too. I don't know whether he's still active in 2018. James Clyburn, Kevin Brady, Joseph Crowley, Greg Walden, Kathy McMorris, McMonkey, McBean Rogers comes next. Jeb Hensarling, Patrick J. Tiberi of Ohio comes next. Above, believe it or not, Nancy Pelosi. So how do you like that? There's a lot of super ambitious Republicans. Nancy Pelosi still raising money and handing it out, but so far either fairly secure in her position atop the Democratic caucus or maybe starting to not care quite as much. Anyway, the list goes on, and it really does. And there's a lot of names to scroll through here, and we could spend the whole show reading. But why do that? Instead, I will scroll back down, and oh, look at this. Is Patrick McHenry running 2 funds? Yeah, he is. How interesting is that? So you'd have to. That's another thing you have to look out for. Sometimes you got to find out whether they have more than one leadership PAC, and add that all up. He runs not only more conservatives PAC, but also, let's see, where was this one? As we were scrolling down, House Conservatives Fund. Anyway, still going here, looking for either of the 2 names reportedly in contention to succeed John Conyers in all of this. And you got to get way down the list. And I think for 2016, I saw Zoe Lofgren's name come up first. We'll see whether they're close in, whether they've given out close to the same amount of money or not. But again, we're getting way down the list. And I'm still going, looking for either one of them. I know I did see Zoe Lofgren while I was scrolling during the discussion with Greg and over the break. So I know she's in here somewhere. But this will give you an idea of how long you got to scroll. So, once you get down here, I mean, maybe money isn't determinative. And of course, there is also the additional complicating factor of we're talking about sexual misconduct settlements. And it really would be helpful to perhaps think about replacing someone like that with a woman. Zoe Lofgren, also from California. Not sure how that plays for her with Nancy Pelosi. On the one hand, Nancy Pelosi herself from California might be very pleased that that's the case, or might be looking at other moving parts and saying, I can't necessarily let my California sympathies color how I approach this race, and maybe it's best that I stay out of it entirely. Maybe they've been hanging out together a lot and are close friends. I don't really know what the relationship is between them. Anyway, Zoe Lofgren, during the 2016 election cycle, handed out some $87,500 from her mainstream PAC to other members of Congress. Then you'd have to kind of, if you really wanted to, do this right, not only would you be adding up how much money she's given out all told over numerous election cycles since the beginning, but you'd also be looking at how many of those people won versus how many of those people lost. If you gave out millions of dollars to people who lose, they're not there to vote for you, and none of it counts. So the rough guide is how much money they put out, and the better indication is how many voting members of the Democratic caucus are sympathetic to them because of the help they gave. And I guess if you give $500 to a bunch of people, that doesn't necessarily go as far as giving $5,000 to several others. But I don't know. I'm scrolling down and I still have not seen Jerry Nadler's name. So, that may mean something in terms of this race. But then again, like I said, chairmanship succession races like this very rarely bypass the seniority issue. So it's not quite the same as it would be for, say, a contest for minority whip or something like that. Yeah, well, I'm still scrolling, and although it's easy to miss something while you're talking at the same time, I just do not see Jerry Nadler's name coming up here. We're down to leadership PACs that in the last cycle gave less than $20,000. So she's up in the $50,000 range. And it may be that, maybe that he doesn't have a leadership PAC, though. It may also be that he's simply distributing all that money from his regular campaign fund. That happens too. So you'd want to check into that as well. But, if our quick and dirty test tells us that Zoe Lofgren has the fundraising and fund distribution from leadership PAC edge, in this race. Although, yeah, like I said, I'd have to handicap it by saying that there are a couple other factors involved. There's Jerry Nadler. Jerry's PAC, $7,000. That's not a lot. That's not gonna do a great deal. That's really, it's not the bottom, but it's close to the bottom. By the way, is there anybody who's like got zero? Oh, well, let's see. Those are all ex-senators. I guess the lowest total for a currently serving member of Congress goes to Mary Perry, a Republican of Nevada, whose Practical Solutions for America PAC gave out a whopping $900. After that, it's just ex-representatives and ex-senators doling out. Oh, well, I'm sorry. There is Bruce Braley's Bringing Leadership Back PAC, which has appears to have a negative contribution. I don't even know how that, I mean, was that like, I don't know what that was. Did somebody refund money or return a contribution to? I'm not even sure what to make of that number being $2,500 in parentheses. All right. Well, that's getting into a level of detail that nobody really needs, but we'll keep an eye on this and see if we can't get some sense of exactly how this thing is going to come out and find out whether this is a predictor for committee chairs or not. In the meantime, I did get more notes from Greg, including this breaking bit of news. Is this from the tweet that you included, Topher Spiro? Yes, breaking. They do not have the votes yet for the tax bill. This week is make or break. Possible vote Thursday. Here's what you need to know. And oh my goodness, it's a tweet storm. Are we ready for that? Attached is a Politico article entitled Tax Reform Hangs in the Balance in Critical Week for GOP. Perhaps we'll read that, but first let's read Topher's tweet storm. The holdouts are, maybe he'll just distill the basic information from Politico for us. Holdouts are Collins, okay. McCain, maybe. Flake, could be. Corker, Murkowski, Moran, Johnson. Daines, Lankford, and Rand Paul. All right, whatever. He loves to get his name in those lists. That's really about it. Their demands are conflicting. Some want more deficit busting. Some want no deficits. While the tax cuts for individuals expire after 2025, Spiro continues, the tax cuts for corporations are permanent. You've likely heard about that one. Paid for by tax increases on middle-income households and a repeal of the individual mandate. The stealth tax increases on middle-income households result from switching to a lower inflation measure, that is to say, chained CPI, for those of you who actually follow such things and know what that is, to grow tax brackets more slowly over time, pushing more people into higher tax brackets. Repeal of the individual mandate will increase premiums for 60-year-olds by $1,269 in 2019, more than canceling out tax cuts for middle-income households. The Senate bill doubles the estate tax exemption to $22 million per couple, which will only benefit the heirs of the top 0.2% of estates. The remaining 0.07% of estates subject to the tax would each get a tax cut of $4.4 million. The Senate bill totally repeals the deduction for state and local taxes, which makes it harder for state governments to maintain state taxes that fund education and infrastructure. And I've seen some interesting charts come out over the past week or so, plotting state and local tax bases versus educational outcomes. And to no one's surprise, if you've been educated anywhere in the United States, to no one's surprise, those states that maintain higher tax bases, and that would mean, yes, higher taxes, and have that practice supported by the ability to deduct state and local income taxes from your federal income taxes, have far better educational outcomes. But who wants that, right? Let's get rid of that as soon as possible. The dumber, the better. Well, this tweet storm goes on for some length here, but we might as well once again tick off some of the major negatives here. Senate bill repeals the alternative minimum tax which ensures the wealthiest individuals, like Donald Trump, for instance, even though he's not really among the wealthiest in the world, but that's the way he was getting stuck with an income tax bill anyway, regardless of all those tricks. It makes sure that they pay at least some taxes because, of course, the Senate bill would repeal that, because why would anyone want to make Donald Trump pay any taxes? The Senate bill sets a permanent corporate tax rate even lower than 20% for U.S. corporations' foreign profits. It gives tax preference to foreign earnings over domestic earnings. That doesn't seem like a good policy approach, does it? As Senator Ron Johnson said, there will be a real incentive to keep manufacturing overseas. The Senate bill gives a 17% deduction for pass-through income. That would be business income claimed on individual tax returns. This is heavily tilted toward the wealthy because the top 1% of taxpayers earn more than half of all pass-through income. And it's almost exclusively how Donald Trump handles his income. The Senate bill does expand the child tax credit, but it doesn't benefit low-income households. It does go to rich households. It is partially offset by eliminating the personal exemption and other tax increases, and it expires. And there's a bit more here, too. Even after accounting for economic growth with their dynamic scoring over on the Republican side, the Penn-Wharton model, run by a Bush economist, estimates the Senate bill will increase the debt by $1.4 trillion. You know what comes next: massive cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, the Senate bill will raise taxes on average for every income group below $75,000, while 72% of the tax cuts go to households with income above $200,000, roughly the top 5%. These estimates do not include the massive estate tax cut. How exciting is that? So, not looking real good in terms of the efficacy of the tax policy captured in the tax bill. If you're looking for, common sense or any continuity with prior so-called conservative positions, but why would you look for that? This was a bill that was written to lower Donald Trump's tax liability and occasionally the tax liability of some of his friends. And that's why he's not going to let you see his tax returns, because then you would know it was true. Should you assume it's true anyway? Absolutely. We know enough about how he does business to know that that's the case. And the fact that he says it's not going to happen that way is another terrific indication. Just like I don't play golf or watch television is a bold and obvious lie, so is his position on what will happen to his taxes under the Republican tax bill. All right, let's see. What other items did he send me? There was at least one other note that Greg sent. Oh, okay. I guess this is really it. This was all a package. There was the Topher Spiro tweet storm and the Politico story from which by which it was inspired. Okay. So I guess we're up to speed on that. Early in the show, Armando sent me what I guess was the worst of this morning's Donald Trump toilet tweeting. I'm not certain that it's the latest and greatest, but I guess we might as well open up his feed just to see. All right, it's not the latest of the bunch, but he stopped tweeting about an hour ago. I guess he got finished on the John and got up and left. The one that Armando sent was, we should have a contest as to which of the networks plus CNN, and not including Fox, why, is the most dishonest, corrupt, and or distorted in its political coverage of your favorite president. Me, he puts in parentheses. They are all bad. Winner to receive the fake news trophy, which is in all caps. That's why I was screaming it. I don't know what to tell you. The guy is a toddler. I mean, I don't know what to do with that. Although that's interesting, by the way. As the tweet went on, it added a layer to itself. I love the idea of he's going to figure out, he wants a contest to figure out who's the most dishonest, corrupt, and distorted in its politics. in a contest as between all of the television networks plus CNN, but not including Fox, which is, of course, a dishonest, corrupt, and distorted way of approaching the question of who is the most dishonest, corrupt, and or distorted in its political coverage. But who cares, because Donald Trump. Okay, so let's see. His latest, the thing that he tweeted as he flushed, I guess, would be the last one here. I'll see if it's any good. The tax cut bill is coming along very well. Great support. With just a few changes, some mathematical, the middle class and job producers can get even more in actual dollars and savings, and the pass-through provision becomes simpler and really works well. That's gibberish. That doesn't really tell us anything. And in between, he had one other thing about retweeting something Dan Scavino Jr. had to say. Does anybody care about that? All right. So it has been a horrible morning of toilet bowl tweeting. Not the worst I've seen in a long time. The weekend produced a lot of interesting Twitter activity from him, to be sure. And by the way, one of the things I saw this morning, which you may have seen when I retweeted it, but I just want to throw this one out there. I can't follow up on it today, but I saw a tweet noting that there was this new Vanity Fair article out on Melania Trump. I think the title is "She Didn't Want This Come Hell or High Water." Inside Melania Trump, inside Melania Trump's secretive East Wing. The East Wing, of course, being reserved for the First Lady. It's a Sarah Ellison piece for Vanity Fair, and I don't think we're going to sort through the whole thing, but what was interesting here being tweeted around was a note both that Melania's parents have been living in D.C. since June, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, it's just sort of interesting, but also that Paolo Zampoli had visited the White House a few weeks ago. And Paolo, you may remember from our readings way back from the diaries by Swedish Jewfish, who wrote the piece "We All Knew About the Trafficking," speaking of the background of Trump models and his partnerships with some of the creepier and, well, pedophilic impresarios of the 1970s, late 70s and early 80s modeling world. And Paolo was somebody who was introduced to us there, and he's since tried to sort of legitimize his career, and I'm sure that they will point to his latter accomplishments in giving any excuses for having invited him to the White House to visit. But among the less troubling and more, I don't know what to say, more friendly sounding credentials he's got is he's the one that introduced Donald Trump and Melania. And so that makes it sort of a sweet, cute story that the man who introduced the two lovebirds was invited to their White House, and how lovely and pure and fantastic and wonderful that all is. But of course, at some point, if you dig into it, well, how did that happen that they introduced, he introduced them? He handled models in New York, particularly rather young ones. She wasn't nearly as young as all that, but he was, like twice her age and on the market. And basically, the real story behind that one is Donald Trump knew very well that when he was single and on the prowl, he could go to guys like Paolo Zampoli and say, "Can you get me a model?" Not, do you know any nice women who enjoy movies and opera or golden toilets or whatever criteria he might come up with, but rather, essentially what Donald Trump would be doing, saying, "Can you get me a young, hot chick? And if so, can we do that rather quickly?" Now, before I get ready to go, oh, by the way, we have another break coming up here. Going on in the background, my mom peeking in here. Mom, are you still here? If you're still here, I'm going to take a break in like 1 minute, and then I'll be with you. So rather than let you run out the door, I'll interrupt and be totally professional. Hi, we can say hi, Mom. Anyway, Paolo Zampoli, also in addition to being that modeling impresario back in the day, also eventually sort of fled to like South America, as I recall, and like the other model agency impresario who he hung out with, and I can't recall, it's John, and it started with the C, and now I can't remember his name, but well, I'll look it up during the break. The two of them went, I think, to South America and were selling units in one or another of the Trump developments down there. And since we read so extensively during the Thursday and Friday shows about the Trump Panama City development, I wonder, although I was under the impression that they worked at the Buenos Aires building, but interesting that they sort of found second careers, both of them, working for Trump later on, and where he could keep a lid on them, I guess. And Zampoli also went on to become some sort of strange international ambassador for the UN, and God knows. Well, we'll see if we can find those interesting tidbits and share them with you in the last segment of the show when we come back after this short break. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, yes, see you later, Mom. See you next weekend as you come back. But anyway, let's see, where were we? Oh, yes, I mentioned to you, of course, the, I would say, groundbreaking diary from back in October of last year, 2016. We all knew about the trafficking, the untold story of Trump model management, part 1, and I don't think we ever got our part 2 out of this, but we read the story on the air. A lot of you have read it. A lot of people, and it made the rounds. Let's say that the bulk of the article is given over to the relationship between Trump and John Casablancas, who was the other modeling impresario, I guess. That I keep using that word, and it might not mean what I think it means. But the founder of Elite Models, and he had a particular, let's say, predilection for very young models, and troublingly so, let's say. And he's a bit of a weirdo, to say the least. He's dead, by the way. And I can't. But we discussed his story. Paolo Zampoli makes a brief appearance in this piece, and really the author, again, it was who wrote under the name of Swedish Jewfish, was clear in saying, well, Zampoli will be discussed more in part 2, but then we never got part 2. But I did a little extra reading and research based on the links that the author provided, and Zampoli is an interesting case all by himself, though not quite as unsettling in his activities, let's say, at least the ones that have been documented in things I've read, as Casablancas was. But I'm curious, and this article I don't think was the one that described Zampoli's latter-day career changes, but it's all out there. Anyway, he's still connected, I guess, and still visiting the White House. I find that rather interesting, to say the least. Let's see, another very interesting story now dominating the lower rungs of the headlines, and I think we've got a piece on it here that I'm reminded this morning by Mark Knoller, who tweeted out that that we have 2 people will be showing up at work today at the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, each one claiming to have a mandate to run the place. It's a new kind of constitutional crisis, I guess, and there's a lawsuit going on trying to settle all of this. I will jump right into the lawsuit coverage because I am hopeful that it will sum up all that came before. We didn't get a chance to discuss it as it was developing last week, but The Hill has this piece: CFPB Deputy Director sues Trump to block Mulvaney, Mick Mulvaney, I guess formerly, is he still OMB Director, as interim leader. How interesting is that? Well, let's find out. Sylvan Lane will tell us how interesting it is for The Hill. The Deputy Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, on Sunday night sued President Trump in order to block Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney from taking over as acting director of the agency. Some of the stories that I put aside from last week that we didn't get to read were outlining claims that such an appointment, Mulvaney, was unconstitutional, which I assume is built into the story of this suit as well. Leandra English, who was tapped by former director Richard Cordray to be the acting director, filed a complaint in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia against Trump and Mulvaney, whom the president nominated to be CFPB's interim leader. The office of the CFPB's head counsel is expected to challenge her suit, claiming Trump has the authority to override the Bureau's line of succession, Reuters reported Sunday night. English's complaint claims that she is the rightful acting director of CFPB and that the court should bar Mulvaney from taking the post. English claims that the provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act that lay out the CFPB's line of succession supersedes the Federal Vacancies Act, which Trump used to nominate Mulvaney. That could be. The president's purported or intended appointment of Defendant Mulvaney as acting director of the CFPB is unlawful, the complaint reads. The suit calls Trump's use of the Vacancies Act an obvious contravention of Congress's statutory scheme that cannot be reconciled with Dodd-Frank's mandatory language. Passed in 2010, the Dodd-Frank Act establishes the CFPB and called on the Bureau's deputy director to serve as acting director between Senate-confirmed chiefs. Cordray promoted English, his chief of staff, to the deputy director position shortly before resigning from the Bureau on Friday. Cordray said he made English, a senior CFPB official, the deputy director specifically to bridge the divide between his tenure and Trump's director pick. English would likely carry on Cordray's aggressive penalties for financial fraud. That would be something troubling to Trump, of course, being guilty of financial fraud himself, and sweeping rules on lending. But Trump nominated Mulvaney to be the CFPB's acting director soon afterward on Friday evening, claiming he had the power to do so under the Vacancies Act of 1998. That law empowers the president to nominate any Senate-confirmed administration official as acting director of a department or agency. English has asked the court to not only bar Mulvaney from the position, but declare that Dodd-Frank's line of succession supersedes the Vacancies Act. English has also asked the court to ban Trump from appointing another acting director. The president may not, consistent with the statutory requirement of independence, install a still-serving White House staffer, that's what Mulvaney is, as the acting head of an independent agency, read the complaint. That's a problem, too. White House officials and the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel argued that Trump's power under the Vacancies Act allows him to nominate Mulvaney over English. The administration is aware of the suit filed this evening by Deputy Director English. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said in a statement provided to CNN. However, the law is clear. Director Mulvaney is the acting director of the CFPB. Now that the CFPB's own general counsel, who was hired under Richard Cordray, has notified the Bureau's leadership that she agrees with the administration's and DOJ's reading of the law, there should be no question that Director Mulvaney is the acting director. It is unfortunate that Mr. Cordray decided to put his political ambition above the interests of consumers with this stunt. Director Mulvaney will bring a more serious and professional approach to running the CFPB. Mulvaney's nomination has been fiercely opposed by Democratic lawmakers and progressive groups aligned with the CFPB, who say the staunch conservative would gut the Bureau from within, and he would. The former House Freedom Caucus member sponsored legislation to eliminate the CFPB, which he's called a sick, sad joke, and had said he doesn't think the Bureau should exist. So you should treat it that way and not show up, I think. But okay. Anyway, the entirety of the suit's filing is embedded in the piece here. So when we include it in the roundup, you can have a look at it. But yeah, that raises some interesting questions, doesn't it? Okay, let's see. Other items of interest that we can still fit in. We want to round up what happened over the weekend. Man, there's a lot. Oh, here's an interesting piece, too. Let's throw this one in your own. It's from The Hill, too. I shouldn't read so much from The Hill, but they do a great job of tweeting their stuff around and making it easy and attractive to read. Obama ethics chief warns Trump. Tweet on CNN could be evidence in AT&T case. I just thought that was an interesting thing to add to the pile here. By Max Greenwood in The Hill, Norm Eisen, the chief White House ethics lawyer under former President Obama, warned President Trump on Saturday, why, I don't know, just to be out there, I guess, that his latest tweet targeting CNN could be used against his Justice Department in its legal fight to block AT&T's merger with Time Warner. How do you like that? He starts out in his tweet by saying, "Dear Dodo in Chief," whatever, you, and I know it's, I hate these abbreviations, but sometimes it's actually kind of funny to abbreviate you as just you, the letter U. You realize that this tweet is going to be an exhibit against you in the DOJ Time Warner antitrust case, right? We're talking about Trump's tweet of November 25th, in which he says Fox News is much more important in the United States than CNN, but outside the U.S., CNN International is still a major source of, parenthetically, fake news, and they represent our nation to the world very poorly. The outside world does not see the truth from them. Well, there's a million things you can argue with there, and CNN did argue with Trump a little bit there by saying your job actually is to represent the nation to the world, not ours, and you're doing poorly enough on your own. You don't need any of our help. But just so, this was part of what Greg had mentioned up during his segment at the top of the show, where Donald Trump was attacking CNN and CNN International from this side, just as Vladimir Putin was attacking it from his side. No collusion there, I'm sure. But an interesting side note there, as Eisen was saying, this could be used as an exhibit against Trump and his position as represented by his Department of Justice in a Time Warner antitrust case. He goes on to say, by the way, of course, it also smacks of collusion since you did it on the day when Vlad cracked down on U.S. networks. For that reason, it may open you to other civil liability. Have a good night. I guess good night is how he signs off. Trump reignited his feud with CNN on Saturday, accusing the network of Twitter of spreading fake news and representing the U.S. poorly across the globe. That tweet came days after the Justice Department sued to stop AT&T's $85 billion takeover of Time Warner, the parent company of CNN. The lawsuit argues that the merger violates U.S. antitrust laws and would ultimately hurt consumers by creating a media behemoth. But Eisen suggested that Trump's tweet could be used to bolster the argument that the Justice Department's lawsuit is rooted in the president's personal dislike of CNN, rather than in any genuine concern about antitrust laws. Eisen also suggested that the president's tweet signals collusion between Trump and Putin, who signed amendments into law on Saturday requiring foreign media outlets working in Russia to be listed as foreign agents. That widely viewed, by the way, to be retaliation for the demand that Russia Today, the RT network, do likewise here in the United States, register as a foreign agent. Special counsel Robert Mueller is investigating Russia's role, of course, in the 2016 presidential election, particularly whether Trump's campaign coordinated with Russian officials or representatives during the race. Trump has denied any improper contacts or exchanges between his campaign and Moscow. And P.S. he denies going golfing right in front of your face as the clubs are loaded into his car. I will remind you of that, hopefully, every time I remember, anyway. Let's see. Other news on other fronts. Of course, I mentioned to you that once again, net neutrality in danger. It seems that job is never over with, so that I'm sure is driving Joan crazy. But this little bit of the story was somewhat interesting. I picked up, for some reason, the New York Post's report on it. Russian bots target FCC in attempt to get net neutrality repealed. Isn't that interesting? I've wondered about this a lot. And, it's the damnedest thing that we continue to have to fight over net neutrality when it is so widely supported on both the left and the right. But like with most things, because it happened during the Obama administration, it has to be undone by the Trump administration, even though really it doesn't benefit anybody who supports or opposes Trump. So I can't really tell you what the deal is except Obama hatred. Max Yeager writes this piece for the New York Post, though, saying Russian hackers are trying to influence the fight over net neutrality, and New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, what do you know, says the feds are refusing to cooperate with investigations into the fraud. The FCC is planning to axe the Obama-era laws which ensure all web traffic is treated equally and which prevent internet service providers from arbitrarily withholding bandwidth or access to certain websites. The agency is required to take public input on the plan, and 400,000 comments, all originating from a single Russian web address, are supporting the regulations. Now, by some accounts I've seen, basically it's almost all of the comments that have come in favor of repealing net neutrality have been from this single Russian address, and that 90+% of the comments in favor of keeping the net neutrality rules in place have been actual organic comments from actual organic people. But to hell with all of that. They don't really listen to those anyway. They are required to take public input, but they're not required to regard it in any particular way. The article continues, there are also bogus remarks against the net freedom rules, including ones logged by names such as Jesus Christ, Homer Simpson, and even Barack Obama. The unprecedented regulatory, and really, can anybody believe a name like Barack Obama? That's crazy. Who ever heard of such a thing? The unprecedented regulatory power the Obama administration imposed on the internet is smothering innovation, damaging the American economy, and obstructing job creation, begins an identical letter submitted several times under those names. Some letters use the identities of real New Yorkers, according to Schneiderman. My office analyzed the fake comments and found that tens of thousands of New Yorkers may have had their identities misused in this way. Schneiderman, a net neutrality supporter, wrote in an open letter posted to Medium, in an era when foreign governments have indisputably tried to use the internet and social media to influence our elections, federal and state governments should be working together to ensure that malevolent actors cannot subvert our administrative agencies' decision-making processes, he continued, alluding to Russia's influence on the 2016 election via bot-driven fake news campaigns. Phony comments have shifted the balance in favor of repealing net neutrality, according to Schneiderman rep Amy Spitalnik. If you remove the seemingly fake comments and petitions without actual signatures, 98% of comments were pro-neutrality, she said. But the FCC says that more than 7.5 million of the total 22 million comments received are bogus pro-neutrality comments. A spokesman could not immediately say whether that operation was based in the U.S. or elsewhere, but the office called Schneiderman's investigation a witch hunt. Oh, of course. Why not? This so-called investigation is nothing more than a transparent attempt by a partisan supporter of the Obama administration's heavy-handed internet regulations to gain publicity for himself, a spokesman said in an emailed statement, because there's really no way for the Attorney General of the state of New York to get publicity for himself, right? Hackers also shut down the FCC comments website's servers by overloading them with fake user traffic in what is called a denial of service attack, according to Jessica Rosenworcel, a Democrat and one of the FCC's 5 commissioners. In short, the FCC's process is broken, she said. To remedy this, it is essential that the commission get out to hear from the public firsthand, just as this agency has done in the past under both Republican and Democratic leadership. There are an additional 50,000 comments the FCC has failed to enter into the record, she said. The 5-member commission, composed of 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans, is expected to scrap the net neutrality provisions next month. Just thought that was an interesting data point in that particular fight. Scrolling further down pocket, let's see. Interesting also to note the New York Daily News had this bit. We won't, I don't know if we should spend time reading it or not, but I'll tell you the headline. President Trump's earliest appearance in Panama Papers revealed. Maybe we can take a quick look and see what the mention is in reference to. Chris Sommerfeld wrote this piece November 24th for the Daily News. Let's see. A real estate deal from the early 1990s is the earliest instance of President Trump's name appearing in the Panama Papers, the massive trove of leaked documents detailing the ways in which the world's richest people hide their business dealings from scrutiny and taxation. The discovery, first flagged by investigative reporter Jake Bernstein on Friday afternoon, involves the purchase and subsequent sale of a condo at the newly constructed Trump Palace on the Upper East Side. The deal involved a mysterious Panamanian company called Process Consultants Incorporated, which bought a 16th floor condo at the Trump skyscraper in 1991. I can't recall whether did we call out the Process Consultants Incorporated name in our reading of the Panama Papers and Panama Ocean, what was it, the Ocean Club down there in Panama City on Friday? I can't recall. You'll have to tell me. I forget as soon as I read these things. Process Consultants was owned through so-called bearer shares, remember those? Which can be used to transfer assets with complete anonymity. Such shares are popular among money launderers. 3 years after the purchase, Process Consultants put the Trump Palace unit up for sale with the Trump Corporation as its exclusive broker. A woman from Hong Kong, whose name has appeared in other leaked documents, appears to have bought the apartment for $355,000, according to a contract. As has been the case with most Panama Papers revelations, there's no indication of who is actually behind Process Consultants or where that person's money came from. I guess there's not that much more in the article, but I guess that gives us the essence of what we're talking about anyway, plus some pictures of the Trump Palace in New York. Very interesting, and we'll keep an eye on that one. Let's see. Man, there's some other interesting things we ought to keep an eye on, and just not enough time to do all of them. Let's see. One other thing I guess that we might as well spend a few minutes on, just to get serious. Once again, a McClatchy D.C. Bureau dispatch. This one from Peter Stone and Greg Gordon. Exclusive. Manafort flight records show deeper Kremlin ties than previously known. That's a little bit off of our path, but not far, and sounds important and interesting enough to perhaps close out the show with for today. That will disappoint some of you, but we have an entire week of shows to get to all the other suggestions that we've got from you, and there are a lot, and thank you, and keep them coming. Political guru Paul Manafort took at least 18 trips to Moscow, on 3 different passports, I guess, and was in frequent contact with Vladimir Putin's allies for nearly a decade as a consultant in Russia and Ukraine for oligarchs and pro-Kremlin parties. Even after the February 2014 fall of Ukraine's pro-Moscow president, Viktor Yanukovych, who won office with the help of a Manafort-engineered image makeover, the American consultant flew to Kiev another 19 times over the next 20 months while working for the smaller pro-Russian opposition bloc party. Manafort went so far as to suggest the party take an anti-NATO stance. An Oppo bloc architect has said a key ally of that party leader, oligarch Viktor Medvedchuk, if I have that anything close to correct, was identified by an earlier Ukrainian president as a former Russian intelligence agent, 100%. It was this background that Manafort brought to Donald Trump's presidential campaign, which he joined in early 2016 and soon led. His web of connections to Russia-loyal potentates is now a focus of federal investigators. Can you believe it? Manafort's flight records in and out of Ukraine, which McClatchy obtained from a government source in Kiev, and interviews with more than a dozen people familiar with his activities, including current and former government officials, suggest the links between Trump's former campaign manager and Russia sympathizers run deeper than previously thought. What's now known leads some Russia experts to suspect that the Kremlin's emissaries at times turned Manafort into an asset, acting on Russia's behalf. You can make a case that all along he was either working principally for Moscow, this is Donald Trump's campaign manager again, or he was trying to play both sides against each other just to maximize his profits. At best, I guess, said Daniel Fried, a former assistant secretary of state who communicated with Manafort during Yanukovych's reign in President George W. Bush's second term. He's at best got a conflict of interest and at worst is really doing Putin's bidding, said Fried, now a fellow with the Atlantic Council. A central question for Justice Department Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller and several congressional committees is whether Manafort, in trying to boost Trump's underdog campaign, in any way collaborated with Russia's cyber meddling aimed at improving Trump's electoral prospects. I don't even know if that's really all that necessary to conclude, but okay. His lucrative consulting relationships have already led a grand jury convened by Mueller to charge him and an associate with conspiracy, money laundering, and other felonies, charges that legal experts say are likely meant to pressure them to cooperate with the wider probe into possible collusion. Government investigators are examining information they've received regarding talks between Russians about using Manafort as part of their broad influence operations during the elections, a source familiar with the inquiry told McClatchy. Suspicions about Manafort have been fueled by a former British spy's opposition research on Trump. In a now famous dossier, former MI6 officer Christopher Steele quoted an ethnic Russian close to Trump as saying that Manafort had managed a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between the campaign and the Kremlin. Gee whiz, it's kind of like what we're looking for. Jason Maloney, hey Jason, a spokesman for Manafort, called that allegation false, saying that Manafort never, ever worked for the Russian government, and Trump never golfs. He also denied that Manafort ever recommended Ukrainian opposition to NATO, saying he was a strong advocate of closer relations with the Western military alliance while advising political parties there. Paul Manafort did not collude with the Russian government to undermine the 2016 election, Maloney said. No amount of wishing and hoping by his political opponents will make this spurious allegation true. Maloney declined to say whether, while in Moscow, Manafort met with any Russian government officials. Just hanging out in Moscow. There's a lot more to it and a lot more detail available in the piece. No way we're going to fit that in today before having to wrap up. But, man, that's a lot of trips to Moscow and Kiev, and that by itself will raise some eyebrows. Do read the entirety of the report in order to get a better flavor for why exactly, specifically, all of these additional trips to Moscow and Kiev are, in fact, worthy of your time and troubling all by themselves. Okay. I guess one or two other items that we might enter into the record before parting for the day. One, an interesting development reported the end of last week by Axios. Facebook will finally tell users if they've followed Russian pages. I think that would really be interesting to see that notification, or to talk to Trump voters and see what their reaction is to finding out that most of what they were looking at and believing was coming from Russia. I don't expect, like anything, all the other things, that it would change any minds about whether or not they support Trump, but I would think it would be something of an eye-opener. I'd like to have that conversation with people, though they probably won't allow it. And let's see, I guess one other piece of some relevance as we roll our outro music, the continuing, I don't know, does it still continue? Continuing fight between LeVar Ball and Donald Trump. Apparently, according to this tweet I picked up from Judd Legum over the weekend, LeVar was right. And he's got a quote in here, a pull quote from some publication. Experts say the players for the UCLA team who were accused of stealing sunglasses while they were in China probably would have been released even if Mr. Trump had not raised the case with President Xi Jinping during his visit to Beijing. Shoplifting actually considered a relatively minor crime, not the major 10 years in jail that Trump was saying. That all seems to be nonsense. And once again, it looks like they were scheduled for release, and it wasn't a matter of it was me, but he seems interested in telling everybody that it was anyway. We'll talk about his enormous ego and the ridiculous results it has brought to bear on, well, the United States and the world in upcoming shows for the rest of the week. But first, I remind you, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is now open Monday through Friday. Following our show, 11 to noon Eastern Time, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific Time. Here's what Justice has to say for today. I'll be serving up a cornucopia of abundance in the front cafe with all the news that's fit to read, and in this reporter's opinion, along with spirited discussions at the segment he calls the Chef's Table. I'll tell you a little bit about what that specifically will be
From
after this.
Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Ready for this upcoming next? Rex Tillerson is purging many of the State Department's high-ranking women diplomats and diplomats of color. Jeff Sessions is exposed covertly installing white nationalism in the Department of Justice. And the Meredith Corporation will acquire Time Incorporated for $2.8 billion, backed by the Kochs.